Now, if you want a personality perspective that is anti-Freud, probably the humanistic perspective is as anti-Freud as you can get. In the humanistic perspectives, your conscious decision-making, your conscious self-responsibility is very much emphasized in the humanistic perspectives. While in Freud's perspective, you are being pushed around by your id, and your ego is trying to control this wild beast. So if you think about one of the analogies for the id and the ego is that the id is a wild horse, and the ego is the rider riding that horse, directing it to where to go, controlling it when it gets excited. Well, in the humanistic perspectives, we are entirely in control. We have the capacity for personal growth. We have the capacity to develop the positive human qualities to become the best we can be. And the person responsible for it is ourselves. We make the choice to engage in those healthy behaviors that lead us toward what both Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. So let's start with Abraham Maslow. You may remember him. We're talking about motivation. We talked about the hierarchy of needs, how you need to satisfy your basic physiological needs first, and then you can move on to safety needs. The humanistic perspective is perceived as the third force in psychology. You have Freud and the unconscious psychoanalytic theory. You have the reaction to it, the behaviorism from B.F. Skinner and from Watson, Pavlov. So you have these two competing theories, and then you have the third one, the humanistic perspective, which is kind of, takes a different tack in both the behaviorism and in psychoanalytic theory. There's a sense that you are in some ways controlled by the environment or controlled by internal forces. Well, with the humanistic perspective, it's more about you're in conscious control of your life. So again, self-actualization is the idea that you can, reach your potential, become the best you can be, have like a spark in life, which is what Maslow referred to. Maslow actually had a set of values called the B values, which is essentially just like an appreciation of life, and just being able to be in the moment and be especially aware of what is going on around you. And that people who are self-actualizers have this particular characteristic. And again, not everybody reaches self-actualization from Maslow's point of view. But basically, that's essentially the top of the pyramid there, the top of the hierarchy. Maslow also discusses times in our lives in which we might be engaging in self-actualization, and these are called peak experiences, where you have these moments in your life where kind of everything seems to be coming together perfectly for you. Time has slowed down for you. You really kind of see everything more sharply. Maybe like a really big moment in your life, you have these peak experiences. Sort of like if you were running a race and you're running as fast as you've ever run before, and you're running far ahead of your competition, and it almost feels as if you're floating. You're not even really. It's almost like you're watching yourself move, but you're so aware of what is going on around you, and time is slowed down for you. That would be an example of a peak experience. And again, that's what kind of self-actualization feels like. Unfortunately, Maslow developed his theory about self-actualization by interviewing very successful people and kind of just finding out what it is about them that made them, that makes them perhaps be self-actualizers. Although he was often disappointed because not everybody, so you had some brilliant people out there who might have still been just thinking about their own, esteem, how they feel, they feeling, good about the approval they're getting from other people, and not so much about their own, self-improvement. Carl Rogers also talks about self-actualization, but he talks about it in the context of personal growth that we all have. We are all essentially built to grow and to grow in a positive direction. And he really emphasized self-determination, being able to make decisions and decide on the path that you go in your own life. A lot of, you think about maybe other people might be trying to push you in one direction or another, but no, he was saying, you got to follow your own path that's natural to you. And that self-actualization is just the natural direction that we go towards as we grow, as we get old, as we continue through life. So, in order to be able to self-actualize, in order to be able to become who we are, we need to have at least somebody give us unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard means that you are seen as a worthy person, even if you make mistakes, even if you don't do what the other person wants you to do. You are still appreciated as a worthy person. Okay? Maybe you have a parent who gives you unconditional positive regard, or a spouse, or a really close friend. On the other hand, people who would give you conditional positive regard, they are instilling conditions of worth on you, where they will only see you as a worthy person if you do this or if you do that. So your boss at work might be giving you conditions of worth. They may only see you as worthy if you're doing a good job and coming in on time and doing all those sorts of things that, a good worker is supposed to do. But otherwise, they would not see you as worthy. So, therefore, they're giving you conditions of worth. If you are relying too much on conditional positive regard, where you're only getting approval from people if you do what they want you to do, then you're going to have some problems in your life. You're not going to be able to follow your own path. You're going to be following somebody else's path, and that's where problems can occur. The important thing about this perspective is to develop your self-concept. In other words, we have our own physical self, but we also have a view of ourselves, a self-concept, how we see ourselves as a person. If we see a really big gap between our actual self and our self-concept, we're seeing what is called incongruence. So, for example, if you see yourself as an honest person, but nevertheless you see yourself behaving dishonestly, stealing, stuff like that, then there's this discordance between your self-concept and your actual self, and you're going to feel a lot of anxiety, and you're not going to feel like you're going in the right path. Getting back on your path would be to kind of live up to, try to live up to yourself, match your self-concept as much as you can. Otherwise, you have what is called incongruence, where your self-concept and your actual self don't match. And again, that's where problems can happen, because, again, you think about someone who might be instilling conditions of worth on you. Well, that might lead you away from your self-concept. If you see yourself as an artist, but mom and dad are pushing you to become a doctor, well, you're pushing yourself away from what you see as your self-concept, and you're going to feel that incongruence. You're not going to feel honest with yourself. So Carl Rogers wants to emphasize that. In fact, the Carl Rogers theory, person-centered therapy or client-centered therapy, is derived from Rogers' theory. So Carl Rogers essentially applied his theory, for the most part, towards therapy technique, helping people essentially discover their own path, find their own way, and not worry about fulfilling conditions of worth that other people are setting for you. Empathy is a key component in Carl Rogers' approach to therapy. You have to be able to show empathy for your client. You need to be able to understand where your client is coming from. So you need to work very hard at really understanding what your client is thinking. So in other words, you have to be observant of your client's body language when they're speaking. Their body language might say one thing, but what they're saying out of their mouth is another. Another thing that you would do as a therapist is you would ask questions. You would try to find out as much as you can about what the person is thinking and feeling, and then essentially repeating what they're saying, just to have them acknowledge that you heard them and understand them. And that's showing empathy. If you show empathy, that'll help in terms of the therapist about the client essentially being honest with you. They see that they're being understood. And this is also where genuineness comes into play. You have to be honest too. You can't just be blowing smoke. You as a therapist need to be honest with yourself about who you are, first of all, and then be honest with how you are reacting to the person who you are trying to help. Not everybody who comes into therapy is going to be the nicest person in the world. And if you are disturbed by what you see, the client is going to know this. So you have to be honest about it and say, hey, what you're saying is really upsetting me. And so understanding that the therapist is being honest with the client, encouraging the client to be honest with the therapist. So what are some contributions from the humanistic perspective? Well, focusing on how we perceive ourselves is very important. Our sense of who we are, how we define ourselves, consciously, mind you, consciously, is very important in terms of defining our personality. The humanistic perspective really helped launch the area called positive psychology, which really focuses on the good things that human beings are capable of, reaching our potential, being creative, being content, having satisfaction in life, becoming the best we can be. That's what positive psychology is about, not just about treating disorders. So the humanistic perspective definitely connects with that. Consciousness is the important thing. How your conscious experience, how you see things that you can actually describe. This really is the emphasis. In client-centered therapy, for example, or person-centered therapy, Carl Rogers is not trying to delve into your unconscious. Carl Rogers is trying to get you to describe what it is you are consciously feeling and thinking, and being able to address that. Some criticism, though, is it may be a wee bit too optimistic. Maybe not everybody is so destined for positive growth that we're going to all be, if we're all going to be wonderful people if everybody just gets out of our way. It doesn't quite work that way all the time. It also perhaps promotes a sense of narcissism. Essentially, if you're going to say, hey, I'm not fulfilling conditions of worth, I'm going to do it my way. My way is the only way that's important. Well, just because you want to be a self-actualizer and because you want to follow your own path doesn't mean you need to step on other people along the way. And it also doesn't mean you need to be totally ignoring the considerations of other people. You don't have to be a slave to someone else's conditions of worth, but you have to be at least understanding of other people's feelings and other people's needs, and at least not be completely selfish. So you can perhaps go overboard with the self-actualization, because the self is not necessarily the most important person in the world.